the past 18 months, we have seen a strong recovery from the GCC banks, mainly supported by the post-COVID recovery, strong GDP growth, the higher oil prices, and the higher interest margins that have, higher interest rates that have led to higher margins for the GCC banks. However, now we see that the macroeconomic is less favorable for the banks. We expect the higher interest rates for a longer period of time to basically reduce the credit growth outlook of the banks, in addition, of course, to the oil production costs that should also reduce the GDP growth levels for these countries. But we still expect to see strong growth for Saudi Arabia banks, and in addition to the UAE banks, mainly supported by the strong non-oil GDP growth, in addition, of course, to the Vision 2030 programs related projects that is expected to support Saudi banks' credit growth outlook. Now, in addition to that, we expect the higher interest rates to also lead to higher impairment charges for the GCC banks. And we also expect banks with exposure to countries with higher operating risks, for example, Turkey and Egypt, to also contribute to higher NPL ratio and higher cost of risks. But that being said, there are some mitigant factors here. So, for example, if you look at Qatari banks, you can see that they have a quite comfortable exposure to a robust public sector that is supported by a wealthy sovereign. And for example, if you look at the Kuwaiti banks, you will see that they have strong provisioning buffers that will allow them to mitigate some of these risks and limit the increase in the cost of risk and the NPL ratio. And for UAE banks, we are expected to see some recoveries this year as a result of the strong build-up in provisioning over the past 2 years that will lead to lower credit charges. And finally, for Saudi banks, even though we expect to see a slight deterioration in asset quality as the banks actually shift into unsubsidized corporate loans, if you compare Saudi banks with the other other major GCC countries, you will see that Saudi banks' asset quality still compares positively. So, for example, if you look at the NPL ratio, we expect NPL ratio of Saudi banks to reach around 2.1% this year. While if we compare it to our expectation for the other major GCC banks, we expect their NPL ratio to reach 3.5 this year. And on cost of risk, we expect for Saudi banks cost of risk to reach around 60 basis points, while if you compare it with the other major GCC countries, we expect cost of risk to reach 90 basis points.